Hello and welcome to Woman Power. I'm your host Lorna Grayling, and in studio today we have an extraordinary woman, Marie Anderson. Marie is a modeling expert and an absolute icon in the industry. Being the vice president of elite models in Chicago in the 80s, she was actually the founder of some of the world's greatest and most famous models such as Cindy Crawford and many others. Today she's the founder and owner of Boss Babe Models. She's an author of numerous inspirational and educational books. She's an online coaching sensation and a sought-after public speaker. Taking the time to sit with us today, thank you so much, Marie. We are so honored.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
You have literally been traveling all over the show, so you have been so busy, literally just flying back from Chicago yesterday, right?
Yes.
It just shows your character by still fitting in this interview to sit with us and just share, what you have. Take us back to those incredible years in the 80s where you were the vice president of Elite Models and you had a life that most of us can only dream of, right? It's the stuff that we see on television with red carpets. We're talking Paris, we're talking Milan, we're talking models and fashion and glitz and glamour and lights. And so take us back to that time, and what was that like living in that world?
It was kind of a dual experience because yes, my life from an external perspective was very glamorous, and it was very exciting, flying around the world, scouting, discovering amazing models, turning them into cover girls. It was absolutely amazing. And as you know, and I hope we can get into sometime in the program, is that it was also very ugly behind the scenes with a lot of abuse going on in the business.
That's the whole, I want to say, purpose of your story, of what you uncovered, and how now you're actually using that to empower and be a voice for other models, right? You are the founder, if I can say that, of top world-class models such as Cindy Crawford. But just tell us that story of how you found Cindy Crawford in the beginning. I mean, nobody wanted to take her, right, because of her little mole. And then that actually turned out to be such an incredible selling point, for her and her
signature.
Her signature, yes. For sure.
The story is, I need to go even back before my elite experience, because I was running the photographer Stan Malinowski's studio in Chicago before I became an agent. And why is that relevant is that Stan essentially trained my eye for beauty. And we would go to Rome twice a year and shoot the Italian collections where all the top models from the world were being booked for all the Italian magazines. And most of the models were darker because it was of a European casting, whereas back in America, the girls were blonde haired and blue eyed for the majority of the casting for magazines. So the point is that I got to learn a different type of beauty. My eye was very much guided towards darker, curvier, more interesting looking models, that they were more unique. So when I then would transition, leaving Stan's studio and become an agent for a tiny little agency at the time called Stewart Talent, owned by Jane Stewart, I became a booker. It was within, I don't know if it's because this is like decades ago. I don't know if it was in a few weeks or a few months that I was interviewing a makeup artist by the name of George Statner, and he was seeking representation, and I was taking him seriously, making the meeting. And then he shows me his portfolio, and all of a sudden I forget he's in the room when I see this photograph of Cindy Crawford that was shot by Scott Weimer. I was like, oh my gosh, who is this beauty? He goes, oh, she's just a kid in high school. She's not a model. Everybody's already rejected her. I said, I don't care. I need to talk to this girl. Please help.
Yeah.
And then the story goes on. It took me a while to convince Cindy and her parents that, trust me, I know you have a place in this business. I've been in Europe. I know. Don't use American standards of beauty. I've got this. And so obviously they acquiesced, and together we changed history.
Yeah, as they say. I mean, it's just amazing. I love that story. And I love the fact that in the beginning, her mole was something that would have seemed, wouldn't work. And actually those things in our lives that we think is a problem is actually our signature. It's actually our strength. And so I just love her story, because for me it's so, it's just so beautiful. And that's life. Usually the things that we see of ourselves that we don't like, once we start embracing that, I mean, that's where the true power and the strength just comes in.
That story about Cindy, it was several months later that Jane Stewart would merge with John Casablancas in New York. And so our little tiny agency then became Elite Chicago and Stewart Talent. So Stewart remained the on-camera, the voiceover, and other departments. So we went from being this tiny little agency with the prestige and the glamour of John Casablancas and the Elite brand. We were like a chia pet. It was like adding water, and we just exploded into the scene. It was amazing. And to Cindy's testament, she's the one that made things happen. All I did was give her an opportunity, but I can't claim any credit past that, because once she had an opportunity, she was the one that was doing the work to make things happen for herself. She was already very professional as a 16-year-old.
And it's a team, right? It took you to notice her and to push her and to lift her into those opportunities, and then for her to do the work. Yeah, team effort. And I mean, it's just, the rest is history. We can literally just go to the history books because it's just so phenomenal. Marie, you didn't always start out with this incredible, I mean, you would have looked at your life and it's glitz and glamour and it's fashion and it just looks picture perfect, especially in the 80s, right? But before that, I mean, you grew up in horrendous circumstances. Take us back to your youth and when you had to overcome to be able to get into that industry of fashion and everything else.
The quick version, again, it was one of those kind of dual experiences. What people saw on the outside and what I was experiencing myself on the inside of our home was very different. My father had been a rocket scientist on the Apollo moon program when I was growing up. So that was 60s into the 70s. And what most people didn't know is that my mother was a violent schizophrenic. And so she was very abusive. And dad wasn't around. He was busy putting men on the moon. And I mean that literally, as anybody from the area of Cocoa Beach, like, oh, yeah, that's like legit. That's not a joke.
Exactly.
So my dad wasn't around. He was fully consumed with the Apollo moon project. And so my mother had full reign of the house. So whatever she wanted to do, she could do. And this is the interesting thing about mental health and creativity. As I'll just say insane my mother was with her schizophrenia, she was also incredibly creative and very talented and very charming. So that was a deception. You have this face of she could present to other people, and then there was the face of inside the house. But the good thing is about that is that she had been a model before my parents even met. Wasn't a big model, just a local model in New York. And so as a little person, she was putting on what was called style shows. We now know them to be called runway. And so she was putting on these charity events, making money for the community. And so I would be one of her models walking down the runway in like a little bikini or whatever. And so that is when I kind of got bitten by the bug with the modeling and the fashion component. And then she would also teach me how to sew, how to crochet, how to knit. Like, she was so talented in so many areas. And then before I knew it, I was with all my baby dolls. I was making their clothes from just remnants that we had from around the house, you know, my mother's drapes or whatever. And then the baby dolls would evolve into Barbie because I became much more sophisticated as I got older. And then with Barbie, I would be making her and all of her friends clothes. And so I only had one Ken. So he would be the audience because I was more interested in the girl models than I was in Ken. I was producing these fashion shows, creating all these clothes. And then as I became older, I started making my own clothes and my girlfriend's clothes. And I decided I wanted to become a fashion designer. Yeah. I was obsessed. My mother even gave me a little loom where I was weaving all these little fabrics for my dolls and for myself. So the point, I was just engulfed in this obsession and desire to become a fashion designer. And in Cocoa Beach, Florida, in the early 70s, there was nothing. You know, you could go to like what was called.
There's still nothing. Since like 2024, it's still nothing.
Well, maybe we're going to change that, girl.
Yes, I like that idea.
So like you could go to Eckerd's back before there was a Walgreens in our area. You would go to Eckerd's and you could buy a Vogue. Like that was like, you know, Moses coming down with the templates in his hands, getting a Vogue. So the point being is that I was so obsessed. And by that time, I was 16 and I was married. I didn't know it. I was going to be marrying an alcoholic, but I did. And I would end up becoming a victim of domestic violence. So all I did was went from my mother's violence to my now teen husband's violence. We were still in high school, didn't have any money. So I applied to all these colleges across the country to get a scholarship to become a clothing designer. And everybody rejected me except for one. And I was like, oh my gosh, I had the letter. I was like, it's going to happen. I'm going to become the fashion designer of my dreams. And I ran into my home ec teacher with the letter. And she looked at me like I was so pathetic. And she said, Marie, you'll never be a designer. You don't have any talent.
Oh my goodness.
So I gave up my scholarship because I believed in her more than I believed in myself.
I get chills when you say those words, right? And it's just, again, such a testament of people's words and how powerful words can be, right? When you say something to someone else, it can literally break their lives and change their course. I mean, she didn't at that stage know half of the battles that you've been fighting in your life. I mean, you were a victim of sexual abuse. You were a victim of abuse in your home, severe abuse. I mean, people throw around the word abuse a lot these days. But when we start explaining literally what you've gone through, and you can elaborate on that, I mean, it's horrific circumstances. And then to have this break and someone come and just squash it like that, man, we should really watch our words.
Well, to your point, and this is what I like what became the foundation of my career as an agent, eventually the psychological foundation, is that there were no true modeling agencies in Cocoa Beach, Florida, or the Merritt Island area. When I was a teenager, and because I had been shunned away from my vision quest to become a fashion designer, my friends were all saying, Marie, you should become a model. You're tall, you're thin, you're pretty, become a model. And I was like, no, I'm ugly. Like, no way. I'm really fat, because I had body dysmorphia ideas of my body as a result of the abuse. And we can get into that. But there was one, and I can't remember for the life of me. I want to say it was in Merritt Square Mall. There was some lady, she was a much older lady, and she was doing something with models. And I put on the only nice dress that I had that my mother-in-law at the time had bought for me for homecoming dinner, because I was voted part of the homecoming court. And so I put on the only nice dress I had, and it wasn't long. It was like knee length. And so like I wasn't walking in with a formal or it was a dinner dress, not like what we ended up on the football field in. But anyway, so I put on the only nice dress that I had, walked in, like I pulled every morsel of self-confidence that I could find in my body, walked in expecting like an interview. And she brings me to the front of her. She's sitting behind the desk. I'm standing in front of the desk. She doesn't offer me a seat. And she looks me up and down. And because my skin looks very olive when I get really suntan, she looks me up and down and she goes, you'll never be a model. You have green skin. Nobody's going to hire a model with green skin. And besides, you're too tall. It's like, I didn't walk out of there. It's like my whole body just kind of collapsed and I slithered underneath that door. I was so mortified by those words that she said to me. So that I didn't know it at the time, but as I got older and became an agent, every single human being that I interviewed, I always put myself on the other side of that interview. I needed to make sure that I treated this person, whether I was interested in them or not. And it's the ones that were not that I tended to spend a little more time with to say, look, you're not right for me, but go see this agency or maybe go see this hairdresser, like giving them an action plan. Yeah. So that when they leave, they left with their dignity intact.
Kindness, right. That is so important. That literally changes lives. I mean, I heard a story once, and I don't know if you've even seen him. It's Louis Wojcicki. He's got no arms, no legs. And he tells a story of, someone's kindness that literally saved his life one day. I mean, people's unkindness literally ruined your lives. But he was actually on his way to commit suicide, and a girl was just nice to him. He was on his way out from school in his wheelchair and he was ready to commit suicide. And she was just kind. She greeted him, asking him how he was. And I forget the whole story, but it just literally, she was just really nice and kind to him. And that just got him thinking, maybe I can keep going one more day. And that turned into one more day, and literally now he's changing the world as a public speaker, and as so are you, right? I mean, you're a sought after public speaker as well, and a coach, online coach. Marie, I know all the abuse, all the horrifying words of unkindness and destruction in your life brought you to a place where you actually tried to commit suicide. Yes. Share that story with us, and how one girl actually saved your life, right, as well.
I love telling this story because it involves my best friend since first grade. So I went to Our Savior's Catholic School in Cocoa Beach, and I met my best friend, Janet Mishler, in first grade. And so living in Cocoa Beach, going to school together, flash forward, then I would be 16, a victim of domestic violence, being married to an alcoholic who never had accountability in the neighborhood because his father was very wealthy and very much embedded in the political climate of the community. So, my being beaten was not something anybody concerned themselves with. But yet I went to high school and I presented myself trying to look nice and, create this image. So a lot of people didn't know what was really, again, it's like with my mom, a lot of people didn't really know what I was enduring. Now, of course, Janet did. But there was one particular horrible thing that had happened to me. And this was after he stuck a loaded rifle to my head and said, I was down on my hands and knees. And he picks up this rifle, sticks it to my forehead, and says, if you ever leave me, I will kill you. And it's like, I did not ever question that. I trusted him to have the wherewithal to do that. And so once I realized that he was going to be in control of my death, I decided I was going to do it myself. I was not going to give him the satisfaction. So my girlfriend Janet and her boyfriend Paul, my husband and myself, we used to go at the end of Minuteman Causeway. There was a bar called Eloise's, and we were young, but we looked older, so we never got carded. So we could go into bars like, you know, we were adults. It was just a different world back then. Cocoa Beach was very relaxed.
Yeah.
And so anyway, the point was we went to this bar, Eloise's, a little beach shack, Minuteman Causeway, and literally it was on the beach. And so I waited till they were drunk enough. I had a big bottle of pain pills. And so I waited for them to get drunk enough that I figured if I excused myself to the bathroom, nobody would pay attention. And so I go around the bar where they couldn't see me, get this pitcher of beer, sneak into my husband's Buick Skylark. I think that's what it was, a blue Buick Skylark. Lock the doors, sit in the center seat, and I just start drinking this warm beer along with all these pills. Like I'm not rushing because I didn't know anybody would be interested enough to find where I was. So I was just listening to the music that was wafting from the beach shack, sitting there staring at this little hotel, the strip hotel that's there, still there, and just enjoying the breeze, not the breeze, but the warmth that the warm breeze that was coming in from the ocean. So it was kind of getting very humid inside of the car. And I was taking these pills and I was starting to feel sleepy. I was very much feeling a sense of peace. And then all of a sudden on the passenger side, there's Janet seeing what I'm doing. And she starts slamming her hand against the window. And I was like, it's okay. Just leave me alone. I can laugh now. I said, leave me alone. And I'm such a caretaker. You know, you talk about something negative becoming a positive. I'm such a caretaker. I was so worried about my best friend hurting her hand on the window.
And that's what
I wasn't worried about me. I wasn't worried about me dying. I was worried about my girlfriend Janet hurting her hand. And so by that time, my husband had come around to the other side and he started screaming at me. I was like, okay, fine, I'll stop, because I just could not handle the abuse anymore. My body just had given out emotionally.
How did you come back from that place of such negative words, there is literally nothing left of you emotionally, physically, and you managed somehow to gather strength inside of yourself to go out and just create this phenomenal successful career. I mean, you are an icon in the fashion industry, literally. What helped you do that? Where did you find the strength to do that?
This is going to sound a little airy-fairy, but if anybody believes in, you know, the experience within the mother's womb, from inception, 9 months, I was hanging out in this violent schizophrenic's womb. So in my mind, I became a fighter inside my mother's womb. And when I popped out, you know, I was too small. physically to prevent a lot of the sexual violence and the physical violence against me, starting as a 5-year-old outside of the family, outside of my house. That there was like, the list is so long of how many people violated my body in the neighborhood, inside of my home. When I was 13, I love telling this story because, again, it's back to Cocoa Beach, one of my favorite people in the world. So when I was 13, I was learning to play the piano. And so that was another thing that I was completely enthralled by. And I had this wonderful teacher. So I practiced a lot. And I guess you could hear it in the neighborhood when I'd be playing. And the neighborhood man across the street had just gotten a new electric organ. And so he said, I was riding my bike one day and he said, "Hey, you play the piano?" I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "Well, I have a new electric organ if you want to come over and play it." And I was so excited that somebody wanted to hear me play, other than my piano teacher, because Lord knows nobody in my family wanted to hear me because I was not that good. And so I ran over. I was so excited that I run over to his house. I was playing the piano proudly, and I was a little nervous because I had a new audience, and I was trying to remember all my keys, because I had a favorite piece by Beethoven. It's Moonlight Sonata. Anyway, I was proudly playing, and he was standing over me with this, like, I think it was called a highball glass, and I could hear the rocks kind of clinkling in my ear, and I think he was like drinking bourbon or something. And so I was wearing this tube top with straps. I can't remember what they were called, but they had a little stretchy top. And he then pours the drink down the front of my top. And I didn't understand what was going on at the moment. And he goes, "Oh, I'm so sorry." And I said, "Oh, it's okay." And then he sticks his hand down my top, trying to take the liquor out of there. And then it's like, oh, now I know. Now I know what's going on. And immediately I tried to flee, and the man door to the garage was thankfully unlocked. So I opened that door, and I see that the garage door, I didn't even know where I was going. I just wanted to get away. And I see that the garage door has this little space between where the door had not completely closed. And I was like, oh my God, escape. So I ran, and I kind of pulled myself underneath that door opening. And because I was so little, I was starting to pull myself through. And all of a sudden I felt his hands grab my ankles, and I was trying to hold on to the pavement. I didn't say a word. I didn't know how to scream. I just knew that I was being pulled back into the garage. And all of a sudden I heard in the distance the front door slam, and his wife said, "Honey, I'm home." And he let go of my ankles. So I ran across the street, completely traumatized by this event, 13. We didn't know what to do in the early 70s. There's like no hotline. You didn't call the police. Like we did not have these conversations that we have now back then. And so I told my parents about it. They dismissed me. It didn't even happen. Why am I making this thing up? And later on that night, I was playing, we had a spider monkey, and his name was Louie. I was in my bedroom where I thought I would be safe, which is right next to my parents' bedroom. It's a ranch house, so it's long left and right. And then there's a living room in the center. And so my bedroom and my parents' bedroom were off to the right. And so this man had never even been in our house. So I'm in my bedroom, sitting on the bed, playing with my monkey. I think it was like 10 o'clock at night. And all of a sudden, Louis looks up, and there's the man standing in my bedroom doorway, and he starts screaming, and he poops diarrhea all over the front of me because he was so terrified.
Because he can obviously feel your emotions, right? The animals.
Yes. And so he starts to walk in my bedroom. I'm covered in poop. The monkey is screaming, and my dad walks in and addresses him by his first name and says, "What can I do for you tonight?"
Not, "What are you doing in my daughter's bedroom?"
Yeah. It did, like,
what can I do for you?
My dad connected and didn't want to make a scene. I don't know. I don't know what happened there. But then he escorted the man out of my bedroom, and I immediately ran to the phone, and I called one of my other best friends, male best friends, Eric Munsterman, who was on the football team. And I called him crying, and he came over like, a superhero on his bike. And then, because the man, after he was escorted out of the house, he was standing in his driveway, leaning against his car, just waiting for another opportunity. And so Eric stood in my driveway and leaned against our car until the man, it took a while. Eric would probably remember better. He's got a better memory than me. To me, it felt like hours. For as long as I know, it could have been minutes. But the point being, had Eric not been there, I don't know what would have happened next, because apparently my father wasn't interested in protecting me, or didn't know to protect me.
Oh, Marie, I mean, this is one of the events that you managed to escape. I know that there are other events in your life that you were not as fortunate, to escape from. But is this what drove you to become such a voice for models out there? Because I saw your interview on the 60 Minutes Australia, and you were one of the key people to help advocate for violence against models, and the excruciating and traumatizing sexual abuse that went on in that industry. And I know many models actually came to you, confided in you about what was happening with them. How hard was it for you to keep silent? Because they asked you not to say anything, right? But that must have been so hard for you, knowing what you've gone through, and then having to keep this quiet. And then once they did start speaking out, the models, again, nobody believed them. How did you deal with that, and how did that make you feel?
As you said, since I had been a survivor myself, I had profound empathy and understanding of what that does to your central nervous system. The way I describe it, feels like being electrocuted time and time and time again when you experience chronic abuse. And so you become very shattered, is the best way I can describe it. But you can have this beautiful exterior and pretend everything has happened, or everything is good is happening, but knowing on the inside you're being triggered by, even for me, even looking at a photograph, or even hearing a word, or I get triggered so easily. I'm 65, and it's still happening in my life, regardless of being in a 12-step world for almost 20 years, being clean and sober from my drugs, alcohol, and cigarettes. So when girls would tell me their stories, I would want to do something, but then, and again, keeping it in context, this is the 80s. We did not have the conversation back then. So they would swear me to secrecy, and I would have to honor that confidence. Yeah. And so, as the story goes, in 1990, I always get lost in my eras. In 1990, when I quit Elite, in defiance of the abuse that was going on, I tried to talk about this in Chicago. The press was not interested. Nobody was interested. This is way before Me Too. I was trying to have this conversation, and people were like, oh, stop being a drama queen, Marie. Nobody cares. It's like part of the business. So you have sex. So she was raped. So he was raped. So what? It's not that big of a deal. It's inherent in the business, Marie. Stop making a fuss. I mean, this was the constant message I was being told. And then a wonderful journalist from New York, Michael, wrote a book. I can't believe I'm forgetting his last name. Michael was in the process of writing this awesome book called Model, The Ugly Business of Beautiful Women. And he had called me and asked me about some stories that he had heard through the grapevine, and were they true, involving elite. And I said, oh yeah. And so I told him then his book would be published. And I was thinking, finally, yay, finally the conversation is going to start happening. We can start helping these models. Nothing happened, really. I mean, yes, there was some awareness, but nothing significant. And then and I think that book was somewhere in the late 90s. And then there was a documentary that was made by the BBC.
With actual footage, right? I mean, they had actual footage of these guys admitting what they're doing to the models. I mean, it's bizarre, and it still got thrown out. So, Marie, I mean, how can we help people out there, and, you know, as a woman, if they have gone through these kind of experiences? I mean, now I know you advocate, and you're an incredible coach who helps people and women, especially through these kind of things. But what would you say, you know, what is important for the people out there, you know, the citizens, as well as women that has gone through this kind of abuse? What advice would you give them?
Reassure them they're clearly not alone.
Yeah.
And to reassure them that I believe them.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people in this world that do believe them. Mm-hmm. And it's a matter of finding their tribe. Yeah. That will support them and be part of that community. And thankfully, when you have, they're not therapists, but there is an organization, thank God, Sarah Ziff, I call her my shero. Sarah Ziff, you know, talking about the evolution of things that weren't making changes in the business, like that BBC documentary that got blocked from airing anywhere outside of Europe as a result of the slander lawsuit that Elite brought towards the BBC. That was and there was also Diane Sawyer had done, was it 60 Minutes? I think maybe. There's with Jean-Luc Brunel exposing this kind of abuse. Like, there was all these events where I kept thinking, yes, finally,
now it's gonna be.
Mm-hmm. And then it was like, oh, yeah. Womp, womp. And then, and I can't remember which happened first. It was around like the same time, if it was the Me Too movement or Sarah Ziff first. But Sarah had produced a documentary. She was a super successful global model, beautiful blonde. And her boyfriend followed around Europe, and the beginning of the it's called Picture Me. Mm-hmm. At the beginning of the documentary, you see this bright-eyed, excited, young, happy human being. And then as they proceed through video, showing the abuses that was happening. And with that documentary coming out, still nothing happened. And that was an American distribution. And then the Me Too movement, Sarah then opened up her nonprofit called the Model Alliance in New York. And so she started getting laws changed in the state of New York, and I'm pretty sure there were 2 laws that were changed in the state of New York, and then a law changed in California. All 3 of them as advocacy endeavors to help create safer work environments for the models. And for me, it's like, do you remember the cartoon Horton Hears a Who?
Yes.
Remember, there's the little voice going, "We are here, we are here," like the person and the little guy in the clock tower. I felt like the person in the clock tower going, "We are here, we are here, we're here." Nobody wanted to hear me. Nobody would, because I was in Chicago. You know, I wasn't this massive model like Sarah Ziff, but you know, God has His plans for all of us. So if I could influence on a micro influence where it just be one person, okay, then that's the reason I survived that initial suicide attempt. Like, so if I could help more people, because I've had 36 friends make that choice of suicide, 36 friends, the majority of them in the business. So what does that tell you about what's happening in the business?
Yeah, it's an excruciating business, right?
So if they're in the modeling business, they should reach out to the Model Alliance in New York. And there's also another organization in London called Models Trust, who is doing the same thing. So you have one organization overseas, and then you've got this other American organization, the objective, creating safer work environments. They're doing it a little differently, but the point is, finally, this conversation is being had. And you know, with the Harvey Weinstein and all the other ripple effect that happened there, and now the Jeffrey Epstein, the Jean-Luc Brunel, like finally, people are having the conversation about it and not in denial.
Yes.
Because once you acknowledge that this is a problem, then it falls on your shoulders. Do you do something about it, or do you keep quiet?
Yes, exactly.
And it's so much easier to keep quiet.
It's so much easier to just keep quiet and deny. But I love what you're saying about just opening up these kind of conversations, keep talking about it, and then reaching out, right? Because there are these organizations that have already started up and that you can become a part of. And then what grabbed my attention, what you were saying, is that from your past, you know, finding that reason why did I survive? Why am I here? And helping other people gives you that purpose of surviving and of being here. And ultimately, I love it when I do outreaches and things. I think I'm going out to go and help. But in actual fact, it actually serves me so much more, right? It's like when you open your hands to go and help, you actually receive so much more. So yeah, just finding that purpose, right, in the industry. Marie, our time is up, and I just want to thank you and honor you so much for the work that you're doing in this industry and just for the incredible person that you are. Your story is just one of such overcoming, and you just keep on shining and doing what you're doing. You're making such an impact in this industry. Thank you for that.
Sure, and thank you for allowing me to share my voice on your show.
And that is it from me, Lorna Grayling and Woman Power. If you would like to get in contact with Marie, have a look on the screen. Her details and website will be on there. If you would like to book her as a speaker for your next conference, take a look on the screen. And until next week, goodbye.